So today we're going to be looking at a brand new car from Team Corelli. This is the ASUGA XLR 6S. This is a larger than 8 scale buggy. It's actually more like a truggy size. This is actually 15% bigger than the standard 8 scale buggies on offer from Team Corelli, but it still retains the standard 6S power system that we're so used to seeing in the Team Corelli cars, which are actually very powerful. So this is still capable of some pretty crazy speeds, and of course these are available in 2 different versions. You can get them as a ready to run like I did, or you can get them as a roller, and there are 3 different colors. There's a green one, a red one, and a blue one. They are all 4-wheel drive, and if you get the ready to run, they are capable of 100 plus kilometers an hour or 65 plus miles an hour, which is pretty crazy. But unfortunately, they don't give you the gearing for that. You are going to need to get that yourself. And these are only splash proof, not waterproof. And what that means to you, well, basically you just can't go swimming with it. But it does have a lot of really cool parts here that we're going to go through. They've changed a lot on these cars, including a brand new chassis. So let's get the box out of the way and let's have a better look at this thing and just see what you actually get when you unbox one of these. So of course, with the ready to run, you get the car fully assembled and ready to go. You get your radio and you get a bag with some goodies, which I'll get out of here really quickly. So first thing in my hand is a little bind plug that in case you need to rebind to the car, a little antenna tube with a little cap that always keeps falling off, which is something that I think Team Corelli still need to address at some point. You get a user manual for the radio, so that will tell you everything that you need to know about all the dials and how to set it all up. You get a user manual for the ESC as well. And something with these ESCs, which I think is really cool, is that they actually come with a adjustable BEC. So out of the box, they'll have a 6-volt BEC, but you can bump that up to 7.4 volts, which means that you will actually get full potential out of these servos. These are high voltage servos that are included with these cars. I've done this with a number of the other Team Corelli cars that I've had no problems, but of course, if you're unsure, leave it as is and I think you'll be fine. The user manual is pretty standard for Team Corelli. They really haven't changed anything here. They've got all the usual bits and pieces, part numbers, exploded views, and illustrations of how everything sort of goes together. They do have a speed chart here, which I kind of find a little bit tricky to understand, to be honest, but maybe that's just me. I had to look up the part number for the stock spur to understand that this actually comes with a 52-tooth spur gear and a 13-tooth pinion, which means your top speed out of the box is going to be about 91 kilometers an hour on 6S or about 60 kilometers an hour on 4S, which is very usable for bashing. You're not going to really need much more than that. But if you really want to go all out and do the speeds that are claimed on the box, you are going to need to get a 15-tooth pinion, and then you'll be able to sort of get that, or reduce the spur gear to a 46-tooth. I believe that's how this is sort of charted, but you can get upwards of 143 kilometers, so almost 90 miles an hour with the right gearing. So this thing is claiming to be very, very quick, which is not surprising. I mean, Team Corelli power systems have been known now for a long time to be super powerful. Now with the radio, this is one that I've had before when I unboxed the Skeeter some time ago. It's actually not a bad radio. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the holes on the handle, but I guess, on warm days, this will provide a little bit of breathing for your sweaty hands. You can always put like, something around it, like the wrapping of a tennis racket or baseball bat or whatever, just to get a little bit better grip on there. But aside from that, the trigger's fine. It's got a nice foam wheel, which doesn't feel too bad. Runs on 4 AA's, which you are going to need to get yourself. And then back here, you have the usual trimmings and everything else. If the camera would focus here real quick, you've got your reverse switches up the top, a couple of LED lights, on and off switch back here, and then you've got your steering trim, throttle trim, and steering dual rate over here. Again, there is a user manual kind of showing you what all of these things do with the radio. No collapsible antennas or anything like that. Good range. I think this is claiming to be 300 meter range, which is pretty good. So yeah, should do the job just fine. And here we are for the main event, which is of course the car itself. I really like the color scheme on this and what Team Corelli have done with this car. There's a lot of new features that you might be picking up on as I swing this around. A lot of new little tidbits and upgraded components and changed parts that they've done with this car, and we'll go through this as in a bit more detail as we go through this unboxing. So we'll start from the outside and work our way in. Wheels and tires. These are obviously oversized 8 scale buggy tires. They're a cross between a buggy size wheel and a truggy wheel. And to give you a bit of a comparison, I'll grab the Radix wheel, which is a very similar wheel to what comes on the ASUGA, and you can sort of see the difference in diameter there from one to the other. So even though this runs 17mm hexes, you can put anything that runs the same hex on here. So you can monsterfy this thing by putting monster truck tires. You can truggify it by putting trucky wheels and tires. But if you go with the standard buggy wheel and tire, that's going to look a little bit small. It's going to look like it's missing, hasn't done leg day in a while. So just something to keep in mind. Obviously, it's a little bit narrower in the width as well. So you can see the difference there in the width, just for those of you curious playing at home. So I can get rid of that, and we can focus on the product at hand. The wheels I don't have a problem with. The tires are a sort of a medium firm, and they're actually not a bad tread. I mean, this kind of reminds me a little bit of the Louise or Duratrax tread, but I think they've changed it enough to make it their own. So it does look pretty good, and I'm hoping there's actually grip nicely on the BMX track when I actually take it out there. It does have a very small sidewall, and given that the foams and everything do feel a little bit firm, it's probably not going to balloon too much, and that's a positive, I think, in my book, because if they'd gone too soft, these would have probably just stretched into pizza cutters and shredded in the first run of 6S. So my biggest concern is hoping that the tire doesn't come off the wheel, which is something that I've seen in a lot of cars over time. It didn't initially happen, on the channel. I had a lot of 6S cars that I didn't have a problem with, and recently, over the last 3 or 4 years, I've noticed more and more companies having issues with tires coming off the wheel. So that's my biggest concern there. Suspension wise, feels very, very nice. Feels kind of plush, but it has a really good solid rebound. There's a lot of ground clearance here. So this is really set up for bashing, to really do some gnarly jumps and conquer all sorts of terrain, given that it is a buggy, but a large buggy, right? It's a big scale buggy. The shocks are big ball aluminium threaded body shocks. I think there's a 3.5mm shafts that I see on here. You got the little caps on top as well to protect the shocks, which I think is really, really good. And then as we take the body off, for those of you who may have picked up these little plastic bits on the body here, this is a really cool idea. I like what Tim Corelli have done here. This one being oval at the back to allow any flex on the body or the chassis, and just, so it doesn't tear these bits apart. This, as you can see, is actually bolted on to the body itself. Same with the rear. It's bolted on. And then, of course, you got your standard sort of body pin tethers on here, so you don't lose those. No skid plates or any plastic protecting sort of things on top of the body, and no tape or anything like that on the inside of the body. So it's a very clean, very simple setup. The body itself feels like a standard body. It's not super thick. It's not very thin. It's pretty standard stuff. But I do like the scheme. I do like the design. I think they've done a good job with that, and I really, really like this idea. This is brilliant. I hope they implement that going forward with some of their other cars as well. As we look at the guts of the car, you can see that the layout here is actually very similar to what we've already got in a lot of their cars, but they've changed a lot. There's actually a lot of new components here. For those of you with a bit of an eagle eye, you might be picking up on some bits and pieces that look very different to their current lineup, and that's something that we really want to talk about as we go through this unboxing. So starting at the front, we've got a fairly generous front bumper. This one here wraps around and acts as a skid plate, as you can see there on the front. It does still run a standard 3mm chassis, which is really nice and etched. And then you've got a nice little bumper on the back as well to add a bit of extra protection. And these are actually pretty solid. So I think if you're gonna have like a really nasty landing on the back, that rear bumper might actually offer a bit of protection. It is still going to allow the wing to hit hard, but the wing does flex. So I think this is going to help a little bit. I mean, if it stuck out too much, I think it would have looked a bit odd. So I think they've done enough to just offer a bit of protection for the back here. The wing itself feels pretty standard. It is a bit bigger than some of the other wings on their other cars, obviously to keep within the proportions of this car. The wing mount is quite different on the back as well. So this part here I think is pretty standard, but then they've added this extension on top here. And then there's another piece, which I don't think I've seen before. It's this piece here, which braces to the top of the shock tower. And then all of that goes down to a brace, which is a really thick brace. This is all new parts here that goes down into the center of the car all the way there. And you can see here that they've changed the bracing system completely. Instead of going with the tower-to-tower brace, they're actually arching back from a central point in the center back down to the actual braces. So this is going to stop the braces from flexing, and it's going to stop the chassis from bending up this way as well. So this should add an enormous amount of stiffness to the chassis. And on top of that, we've also got another brace, which is going to be hard to spot. But if you look right parallel with the actual battery tray, there's another brace that runs along there, which is a vertical brace, and that's bolted between these two chassis braces, and it just kind of sits there to add some extra rigidity to the chassis in a center point, so it doesn't flex at all. So this is stopping the chassis from having that flex, where these traditionally are designed to stop the chassis from bending at the rear, which is the most vulnerable point where the chassis is the thinnest. This here is actually stopping it from bending in the middle, where there is technically no bracing, which is why a lot of people run the tower-to-tower braces to prevent that from happening. But they've changed the game here a little bit. This is a really clever idea, and I really look forward to seeing how this is actually going to be, how it's going to last long term. And then as we go to the front here, you can actually see that this brace is totally different again compared to what they've used previously. It's super beefy. All of this is bolted on. As I flip it around here, you can see that it's all bolted down, all through the center, all to the back. If I can get my finger to point in the right direction there. So this looks like it's going to be very well anchored and very well supported. The entire front end here, this whole top plate is all a completely new design. You could probably retrofit this into your existing Tim Corelli cars, but you're going to need to change the bracing altogether. It's a very complicated thing. I don't know if everything's going to fit straight on. So yeah, they've changed this completely. So I think it's going to be very, very nice to see how this is going to last long term. I think they've, this is one of the components that I've broken a few of these top plates in the older designs, and I've also broken a few chassis braces in the front here. So them changing all of this, I think, is a good thing, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it's all going to last. The shock towers are 5mm thick, and these are CNC machined. Although I don't believe there's a 70-75. There might be still 60-61, but to have the machine is actually a bonus. The A-arms have this little sort of winglet on here, the upper A-arms, which is actually going to help with those high speed passes to keep the car down in the front end, because obviously you've got this bumper here which is going to direct air underneath. Once you set it up and you have these guys kind of pushing down, I think it's going to help keep the car planted. And according to Tim Corelli, these are actually pretty effective. Now, they are not the first ones to do this. I think Tim Associated have been doing these for a little while in their race kits. So to see that here on a basher, I think that's a really cool introduction to this sort of feature. You get CVDs in the front. You get those hard-wearing hubs that Tim Corelli have modified over time to make sure that the pillow bars don't pop out. The A-arms have these little rings on here to protect them and stop them from splitting. You got sway bars front and rear pre-installed. These copper-looking outdrives, these are actually a special hardened steel that Tim Corelli have put on their car, and I think they've done it a lot on their other cars as well, just to stop them from wearing out, so that the dog bones don't actually eat into the grooves. So the center diff, the front and rear diffs, they've got those out drives, which I think is very, very nice to see. 5mm drive shafts, new front and rear A-arms. Whoops, where am I? New front and rear A-arms here. And we've also got some fresh bracing on the hinge pins, which is a welcome addition and welcome improvement to these cars. As you can see, we've got some red washers here to stop the arm from sort of jiggling around. And then we've got aluminium chassis, or rather hinge pin braces, front and rear of the rear A-arms, and also front and rear of the front A-arms. So really good to see that Tim Corelli really stepping up their game here as far as the bracing and strengthening the car, just to stop these sort of components from breaking on us as well. I believe the diff cases are still the same, so they really haven't changed, and the diffs inside I think are still the same as the previous ones, but they do have hardened steel gears in them as well, so that should work quite well. Something to take note of as well, these fixed camber links. These have actually been redesigned to have a little bit extra plastic around there so they don't break, and that goes for the steering links as well. So these are being beefed up. The servo and receiver box I think are the same as all the other 8 scale cars, so that really hasn't changed. The battery tray is very much the same as the other 8 scale cars, so that really hasn't changed. You still got your Torx 150 amp ESC here, which comes with XT90 connectors. They have changed the switch housing and position, so it's now kind of in a little plastic sort of surround, sits in there nice and tidy. You're still running your 4074 2050 kV brushless motor, so this thing is capable of some pretty crazy speeds, as I mentioned earlier, and it's been very powerful in a lot of the other cars that I've got from Team Corelli. So far these electronics haven't really let me down. And of course you've got the antenna sticking out here, which is what that antenna tube is for. I would personally cut the antenna tube down a little bit just to make sure that the the antenna is not rubbing on the body or anything like that. So just push this down a smidge and just have it sticking out like that. I think you'll be totally fine. And I think that pretty much covers everything as far as I can remember. What they've done and how they've sort of made this car, I hope is a glimpse into what might be coming in years to come from Team Corelli. The fact that they are continuously innovating and improving their design, trying to make it their own, trying to change things so that they set themselves apart from the competition, I think is, it's very welcome in this industry. We've seen far too many companies get complacent with their own designs, or they get a bit too arrogant with them as well. Seeing a company that's constantly evolving, listening to what people are saying out there on socials, taking feedback from reviewers such as myself and many others out here on YouTube, and implementing some of those changes and some of those improvements as we move forward. It's something that is obviously very welcome in this industry. So I applaud Team Corelli for what they've done here so far. I really like the design. I hope that this thing holds up and actually performs as advertised. Now, I've only got a couple of things on my wish list, and it's really just about the body. And the reason for that is because when you look at this car, it's really geared towards bashers. There's no adjustments on the A-arms for your shocks. There's only a couple of adjustments on the shock towers. You got fixed steering links, fixed camber links. There's really nothing for you to toy around with here and tune and mess up the settings of the car. It's designed for you to sort of plug a battery in, go out there and have some fun. And that's all fine. That's not a problem. I'm not complaining about that. What I'm saying is, when you take that into account, it kind of makes you wonder why they didn't do a little bit more on the body. And that's where my wish list sort of comes into play. So my first thing is some roof skids. I think this would have really benefited from having some protection here on the roof. Just when you do upside down skids on concrete and you mess up your landings, just to offer some protection here, I think would be a really good thing. And that's something that I hope that Team Corelli can look at in the future. Also, some protective tape on the inside of the body, or something that stops the paint from rubbing off when, it's sort of rubbing on the chassis and the wires and everything else that's going on in there. So something to take into account as well. But they're really the only two things that I could sort of come up with this car. I mean, some of you might want a better quality radio, or they might want, I don't know, an antenna tube where the cap doesn't fall off. But I don't know, like, to me, out of the box, I kind of would have liked to seen a little bit more protection on the body. This is something that I've sort of harped on about with some of the other bash vehicles in the past, but that's really the only thing I could sort of nitpick on this car. And that brings us to the end of yet another unboxing. Hopefully you guys got something out of it. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button before you go. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're new. And as always, check out the video description down below. I'll have links in there to the Team Corelli website where you can check out one of these in a little bit more detail. I'll also have links in there to my socials so you can stay a couple of steps ahead of what goes on here on YouTube. But for now, I'm going to leave it here. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll be speaking to you all next time. You actually get a few little things, but why is that not coming down? Why did it do that to me? And that's everything you get out of the box when you take one of these out of the box. I'll also have links in there to my socials so you can keep up to date with a little bit of what going. But they haven't just recycled an existing Kronos. Is it Kronos or Kratos? Kronos. Shit. Okay, let's start that again.